The question is the motion be agreed to.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Speaker. And to go from, I guess, the jovial debate that we've just had to what is and what can only be considered a very serious matter that is affecting the lives of not just many parents across the ACT, but to a further extent, their children. In early November 2018, a letter signed with 35 signatures of parents, known as Concerned Parents of a Tuggeranong Primary School, wrote to the Education Directorate Liaison Unit. They spoke of the escalation of incidents at the school over the year, the bullying and the violent outbursts that their children had been subjected to, and the frustration that little had been done at the time of the incidents to prevent escalation to injury, or since then prevent its reoccurrence. The Directorate replied, thanking them for their letter, assuring them that the school was taking issues seriously. One of the authors of the original letter again wrote on the 19th of November, advising of 2 more incidents at the school, and again on the 26th of November, outlining a subsequent 2 more incidents. The story has come to the attention of the Canberra Times, and in early February of this year, the article indicated that the situation at this school was not recent and the incidents referred to were not isolated. References made to a student injured in March 2018 and advised to the Directorate, another about a student hospitalised as a result of being thrown against a brick wall. Madam Assistant Speaker, it's probably appropriate that I remind members that these incidents are occurring in primary schools within the ACT. Children aged between 5 and 12 years old. In the Assembly last week, the Canberra Liberals asked a number of questions about what the Minister knew about the incidents at this primary school, what she had done about those concerning reports, and what is being done to support parents, children and the school community. The Minister gave multiple assurances that the school in question was being supported, that new strategies were in place and that parents who raised concern had been contacted. According to parents at the centre of the issue, the Minister's responses did not accord with their recollection or their experience, and they were and are still waiting for answers and for evidence that anything is changing. As the Canberra Times perhaps more accurately records, and I'll quote the article, the incidents were alarming, frequent and widespread, but the school and the Education Directorate appeared to turn a blind eye to the severity despite complaints stretching back to 2017. Responses were often not followed through as promised or not disclosed, and some parents had not been told about incidents at all, including those involving head injuries." End quote. And in the case, the Minister also believes, we're unreasonably targeting this school, the sad reality is that the past weeks, the opposition, particularly Ms Lee, has been contacted by parents from at least 2 Northside schools outlining their concerns over issues that read very similar. One of those parents wrote to the Minister in 2017 outlining that teachers at her child's school were frequently crying in frustration in front of their class. Students were crying because of violence in the classroom that was not being addressed, and that the teachers were not being supported by the Directorate. Multiple parents from that Northside school wrote to the Minister in the middle of last year, but little changed other than an exodus of teachers at the end of the year. Teachers who are no longer able to operate in such a toxic, violent and unsupported environment. At another school, an assault was filmed and the footage later circulated. The parent said she had no confidence in the way the school was dealing with the incident. The incident brought forward the predictable and meaningless responses. It was accompanied by shallow assurances that strategies and systems were in place at that school. A parent from yet another school, this time in the inner south, reports that their son was bullied for several years. The school would investigate, but never reveal actually what happened due to confidentiality. It was only when some parents witnessed the bullying attack of a girl after school that the school finally took any action. Consistently, the Minister and her Directorate have assured schools affected by these apparently uncontrollable antisocial issues that they have strategies in place and that they are working. But this is not the evidence that is coming to light. There is too much evidence that demonstrates they are not. And while ever we have a Minister refusing to acknowledge that there is a deeply concerning problem within ACT schools, things will not improve. She cannot hope to improve or fix anything that she steadfastly refuses to admit needs fixing. We are not to know what goes on directly in these schools. We barely get an opportunity to visit the model schools, let alone any that may be experiencing problems. It's little wonder the Minister wants to restrict access. But parents from those troubled schools are coming to us, and they are coming to us in droves, just like the nurses contacting the Shadow Minister for Health's office for the same reasons: uncontrolled bullying in the workplace and tin ear from the Minister responsible and the Directorate staff. The question has to be asked: if current strategies are working and teachers are well supported and everyone is in control of the situation, as the Minister keeps reassuring people, then why are children still getting hurt? Why are teachers still getting hurt? Ms Lee is the Opposition's Shadow Minister for Education, spoke last week with a teacher who was injured at a school by a student in December. The student remains at the school and continued to inflict injury on others. The teacher was sent home and no one from the Directorate or school leadership team contacted the teacher to inquire about their welfare. A very supportive environment indeed. The Opposition has since also been contacted by teachers who have been injured in their workplace since the new nation-leading, so-called nation-leading, policies were introduced. And they advise that despite following due process and conscientiously reporting these incidences, they received no support from the Minister or her Directorate. And in one case, the teacher was instead criticised for not managing the violent student better. The Minister hides behind policies and procedures. She points to apparently nation-leading changes that have been introduced into ACT schools, but it didn't help that teacher last December. 2 months, Madam Assistant Speaker, 2 months after this nation-leading policy was supposedly nation-leading policy was introduced, the Minister continues to skirt around the fact that action has only been taken because WorkSafe demanded it. And 4 months later on, there is little evidence to indicate anything has changed, or in fact is changing. Teachers are logging incident reports into the Riskman, but nothing progresses from that. Other teachers tell us that they have stopped reporting incidents because it is simply a waste of time. Parents are saying strategies like safe and supportive schools and positive behaviour management plans are, and I quote from one parent, meaningless verbiage that don't inspire the slightest degree in confidence that school authorities intend to address the problems. End quote. Madam Assistant Speaker, a concerning number of parents are contacting the Opposition to tell of their experiences and also the ordeals that their children are experiencing across classrooms in the ACT. But due to the fear for retribution to themselves or for their child, I will not be identifying either the parents, their child, or the schools involved. But suffice to say that these stories are true and are deeply concerning and deserve to be addressed with a matter of urgency. A parent has recently wrote to us saying, here are a few examples of the physical violence that I am aware of at my child's primary school. A child strangled by a peer in front of a teacher. Child thrown to the ground, kicked and jumped on by a group of peers. Child grabbed by the neck and pulled to the ground. Children knowingly put in the same class as the child bullying them. And when the principal is questioned by the parent, the response is that their child needs to learn more resilience. Children in Year 2 engaging in oral sex in the classroom. Children speaking openly about sex and rape in the playground. End quote. This school has had the Positive Behaviours for Learning, or PBL program, since 2016. But this parent, who is familiar with the PBL framework, says violence and challenging behaviours are still occurring at this school and that PBL is not being implemented correctly or consistently. As she said, and I quote, "I want things to improve at this school. 9-year-old kids should not be seeing psychologists because they fear hope is lost." End quote. Another parent said her 6-year-old son told her, and I quote, "The principal doesn't think I matter." End quote. Why do we have, Madam Assistant Speaker, such inconsistency? Why is there such a lack of confidence in schools among so many parents? And why do so many students in primary school think that they, as a student, don't matter? Let me highlight the results of a school satisfaction survey for a particular school that is in question. Students at this school were asked, do you feel like being at your school? The results in 2013, 84% said they did. By 2014, it had gone up slightly to 86%. In 2015, 88%. Something happened in that school after that. This is what we need an inquiry to find out. In 2016, that dropped to 68%, and it stayed there again in 2017. Does the Directorate ever look at such results and ponder what has changed? One thing is for certain, and it's the Minister's ignorance on what is happening in some schools remains constant. Perhaps it is the coincidence that the year satisfaction dropped significantly was the year that this Minister took over responsibility for the education portfolio. Or is there something more sinister at play? The Labor Greens' approach to anything is to suggest that money is being spent, invested, and policies have been published and work is being done to improve things. But let me point out that it is now 3 years and 3 months since the Shattuck report into the Schools for All was published. The events that triggered the inquiry were nearly 4 years ago. $10 million, a substantial amount of money and time creating spreadsheets and Gantt charts and progress reports from an implementation committee, and today we still have schools that have teachers who feel unsupported, angry parents asking why their children cannot be safe at school. Do they have to be like a parent at the Tuggeranong school who removed her child from the school and who has now relocated them interstate where they are thriving and feeling safe and valued? Another who kept her child out of school said, and I quote, "I had to choose between my son's education and his safety. Ultimately, I chose his safety." End quote. There is something endemically wrong in the current structure, approach and attitude of the Minister and the Directorate in dealing with this issue of antisocial behaviour. It is not about equity in school. The schools affected range across the territory and are in various socio-economic catchments. They are in the north, they are in the south, and they are in the middle. It begs the question of quality leadership at individual schools, at the network level, at the ministerial level. This is why we are calling for an independent inquiry. You just can't put a vampire in charge of the blood bank. There is no point in the Minister, those in the Directorate who have overseen these atrocities, assessing themselves, especially in the context of the breakdown of trust that we have seen from teachers, parents, and the loss of faith felt by students. The breakdown of faith in the community, in this Minister whose responsibility it ultimately is to look out for them. The breakdown in confidence in the Minister who has failed them so devastatingly. Such an inquiry will provide a fresh window on the problem, an unbiased study into the various factors at work. Such an inquiry will hopefully go some way to restoring faith in these ACT schools by a growing, disillusioned parent community. It will lead to fewer children requiring psychological support, fewer children falling behind in their studies through illness or fear. We cannot have a school system where a 6-year-old child believes that they do not matter. We cannot have a school system where parents who choose between their child's safety and their education. We cannot have a school system where teachers are openly crying out in front of their class because they have received no support from the Minister or their support leaders above them. We can and must do better than that, and an open inquiry would go a long way as a first step. Our future generation, our hard-working teachers, our parent community deserve that at the least, and I commend the motion to the Assembly.
The question is the motion be agreed to. Mr Parton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This motion is not about it's not about people in suits in air-conditioned offices. It's not about public service speak. As much as the motion mentions data and collection of it, at its core, it's not about at its core, it's not about data. The motion's not about those of us who stand here in this assembly and sometimes act like school children from time to time. As much as the minister would like to believe it's about educational equity and inclusion, at its core, it's not what it's about. It's not about curriculums, it's not about NAPLAN league tables, it's not about the Australian Education Unit. At its absolute core, this motion is about cold, hard fear. It's about the fear that's led one Tuggeranong boy to never use the toilet at his school, for the fear that he will be severely assaulted if he does. And so he just hangs on. He just hangs on. He doesn't go. It's about the fear that led one Northside child to put steak knives in their school bag to defend themselves if that was required. It's about the fear that crushes you when you're 8 years old. It sits on top of your chest, squeezes the air out of your lungs, it renders you speechless, and it forces you to shut down and just point blank refuse to go to school. And that's what the motion's about. At such a pivotal time in the lives of so many young Canberrans, it can and is having a profoundly negative effect on the development of too many of our children in so many key areas. I just don't believe that anyone should underplay this. We're not talking about a bit of push and shove. We're talking about traumatic events that have the potential to shape lives in the most negative way. Now, this year I've hosted a number of forums with parents of ACT students who are at their wits' end. I've spoken to them in my office here. I've hosted roundtables at my home. All they want is a guarantee on the safety of their children, and they cannot get it. They can't get it. Now, I've spoken to a mother who very, very reluctantly, and Mr. Wall referred to her, very, very reluctantly kept her child at home for a number of days because she didn't know what else to do. And I know that Mr. Wall made mention of this quote earlier, but I have to repeat it. This mother said, and I quote, "I had to choose between my son's education and his safety, and ultimately I chose his safety." And I could see when we had this conversation, Madam Deputy Speaker, I could see that it just tore her up inside, and that this was a last resort for her. Whichever way you look at it on this front, based on the information and the stories that have come to us, the Directorate and the Education Minister are letting these children down and letting these parents down. There should be a reasonable expectation that your child will be safe at school, and that expectation does not exist for many. A number of them are in the chamber with us this afternoon. The Directorate and the Minister have failed. But this, and I'm going to agree with the Minister on this point, this cannot be a blame game exercise. It is inherent upon all of us to fix it. We have to do it. We have to do it for the sake of the children. What we're doing at the moment in this space, and I note the Minister has made mention of some changes, but what we're doing at the moment isn't working. It's certainly, like if we talk to these people in the chamber and a number who are watching online, they'll tell you it's not working. And it would be absurd to just keep on doing it. Or worse still, to get the Directorate to examine itself. If members of this place had sat in the forums that I've sat in and seen the tears welling up in the eyes of distraught mothers, I'm sure that they would have no hesitation in voting for an open, independent inquiry. And I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, with all respect, I have to say that I cannot believe that this Minister doesn't think that it's her job to meet with parents face to face on matters like this. I find that impossible to believe. But I have to say, it's a theme that runs right across this government. I recall Mr. Gentleman standing in here in response to a question without notice last year, basically saying that it wasn't his job as the Minister to meet victims of club robberies face to face. It's not for him to mix with those people. It's not for the Chief Minister to turn and face people in the chamber. You know, that I was astounded that the Chief Minister could not even find an ounce of humanity to turn around and have a look at this chamber, which was absolutely chock-a-block full of people whose lives have been destroyed by the policies of this government. And he couldn't find the humanity to do that. The party of social justice has lost its humanity. And when Labor loses the election in 2020, let me tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, that will be one of the main reasons that it happens, is that ministers in this government have built pedestals to stand upon, and they don't believe that it's up to them to sort of mix with the riffraff out in the suburbs and face people face to face, particularly if people disagree with what they're doing. I would urge people through this motion, in this space, in this very, very important issue, to step down from a moment from those pedestals and support this motion. Thank you.
The question is the motion be agreed to. Mrs Kickett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank Ms Lee and Mr Wall for bringing this very important motion before the Assembly today. I also wish to publicly thank the brave mums and dads who have helped make the necessity of this motion obvious to nearly everyone by speaking out and sharing their experiences. They love their kids and just want to see them obtain a solid education in a genuinely safe environment. I rise today, Madam Deputy Speaker, to speak in full support of this motion. In doing so, I wish to share, with permission, the personal experiences of a family that lives in my electorate of Ginninderra. For years, the parents in this family have had complete confidence in Canberra's government-run schools. All of their children have attended these schools, and all of the older children have been successful at school. Something significant, however, has changed in recent years, this family has told me. Almost from the moment that their youngest child started school, the violence started. The parents have gone so far as to describe what their son has experienced as physical abuse. According to what they have shared, he has been punched, pinned, dragged, strangled, and more, all by other children. They have kept a catalogue of his numerous injuries, Madam Deputy Speaker, too numerous to share in this space. At the end of year one, the parents requested a meeting with the school. The only explanation they feel they received was that their son was in a rough year group. There was no promise that things would improve, but their faith in the government school sector led them to re-enroll their son the following year. This became the breaking point. The violence continued and worsened, as did the negative impacts on their child. He became terrified of attending school. He experienced frequent abdominal pains, identified as a consequence of enormous stress. He faltered in his studies so much that a tutor told his parents he was at least a year behind in his learning. Eventually, the parents felt compelled to pull their son out of this government-run school for his own protection. They then spent a week discovering that, by design, it is virtually impossible in this territory to enroll a child in a nearby public school, all of which refused to help them and sent them back to the original school. According to what the parents told me, they next contacted the Education Directorate's liaison unit, which recommended homeschooling. When this family were finally able to meet with school leadership, the principal offered them not a promise that their son would be safe at school, but rather materials for homeschooling. The parents said that they were also warned against pursuing this issue any further, since they didn't want to become that family in this territory. As the mom said to me, she now has some understanding of what it feels like to be bullied. Knowing how much their son had experienced, the parents requested all incidents reports from the Education Directorate and got back a total of just 2 reports. This, they said, was the final straw for their family. In good faith, they had assumed the ACT government was at least accurately tracking what was happening in its schools. Instead, they found out that there was almost no data available relating to what had happened to their own child. Predictably, Madam Deputy Speaker, anytime the Canberra Liberals raise concerns with this government, those opposite immediately pretend that we are somehow criticizing the good women and men who work hard to deliver excellence in their professions. It is important, therefore, that I repeat what the parents of these families shared with me about the teachers at their son's school. They said these teachers are fantastic, hardworking, and skilled. This is not a failure in any way of teachers or teaching assistants or other frontline workers. They, like the kids themselves, are the real victims of the government's failure to keep our schools safe. Madam Deputy Speaker, every student and teacher deserves to be safe in ACT schools. I say that as a mother whose 5 children have all attended these schools. The sad reality, however, is that kids in more than one school are not safe. And the appalling lack of data kept by this government means that we currently have only a vague sense of this problem based upon the personal experiences of the families that are now coming forward. As parents choose to speak out, I have no doubt that others will find the courage to join them, and the extent of the problem will become clearer. But the real solution, Madam Deputy Speaker, is to first acknowledge that the problem exists. Those opposite frequently talk about the impacts of trauma on children and young people and the need to intervene early and provide the supports necessary to stop and reverse the impacts of this trauma. If they are serious, they will agree to establish an independent inquiry to assess the trauma-causing violence that is occurring in our schools. The family whose story I shared today no longer have any faith that this government will take this important step. I hope this Assembly will today prove them wrong. Thank you.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Mr Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And to close, I've heard some powerful stories this afternoon, powerful experiences that kids are having to deal with and parents are having to deal with on a daily basis in a number of schools. The Minister stated in her initial speech that she's never refused to take action, but for those that are living this on a daily basis, nothing seems to be changing. The Minister painted a picture of a school system that sounds like an educational utopia, but this is not the lived reality of those parents or those children that are confronting serious violence and bullying and harassment in their classrooms on a frequent basis. I heard the Minister in her prepared speech, very well rehearsed and versed in the statistics and the philosophy of how things should be changing and how they should be improving. But that does not measure up to what is happening in the classrooms in our schools. The philosophy the Minister highlights is to put children in charge of their learning, but this is not delivering us well-rounded individuals. We're talking about primary school aged children here, children as young as 5. Now, I'm a parent, as many members in here are. My daughter started kindergarten this year. I can tell you for a fact, if I put her in charge of her own destiny on a daily basis, I'd struggle to get her to school with underpants on most days. Our job as parents is first and foremost to make sure that we are preparing our children to be capable and competent adults by the time they finish school. I think there's a huge disparity between the philosophy of letting children choose their own adventure and us being responsible parents, guardians, carers, individuals with a duty of care over children, particularly in a classroom. I've read stories where I mentioned in my initial speech, where the principal's response to a child that was the victim of incessant bullying was to build more resilience. Isn't this how we've come to have such an endemic problem with things such as domestic violence? Children are being taught at a young age to toughen up and accept what's going on. That, Madam Deputy Speaker, I cannot accept. The Minister has spoken of $10 million investment into schools to improve safety. Let's not forget that this is the government that was building a cage in a school to deal with a child once upon a time. Millions have been spent since that incident as well. But the reality for children in classrooms and their parents is failing to deliver on the spin and the hyperbole that gets peddled in this place. The Minister suggested that it was the view of those in the opposition that children be removed from the school in certain instances. And yes, I do believe that at times perpetrators of serious violence or aggression should be removed from that environment. Where else in society can an individual act out in that kind of manner without any consequence? For too long, schools have existed as a bubble, immune from the laws of the land. I think that there should be clear consequences to any perpetrator of this kind of abuse or violence in a school, because it shouldn't be up to the victim to just accept it. I don't think I want to live in a society, let alone represent a society, where we say to a victim, toughen up and learn to live with it. We all know, we all see in this place, and even just the debate that happened before this one touched on the glacial pace at which changes often occur. Policymakers, government are slow at reacting. That is a fact of life. But for the individuals that are caught up in this on a daily basis, it is a lifetime. I have here a letter one of the mothers in the gallery has written, 4 pages, outlining the ordeal her son has been through. It started when he was in year 1, now in year 4. It started when he was a 6-year-old, he's now a 9-year-old. This has been going on for 1/3 of his life. 1/3. And it is little wonder, as his mother says, a 9-year-old child should not have to continue seeing a psychologist because they feel all hope is lost. I saw emotion from the Minister today. It's hitting me as well. As a parent, you expect better than this. The Minister showed deep concern at these stories, as many of us feel. Let that impact on her be shown in the actions that these parents and these kids see in the classroom tomorrow morning. Not about more talk, it's not about spending more money and more headlines and glossy programs. The measure of success for what this Minister can do is going to be felt by those parents here in the gallery. I look forward to seeing that situation change for them. As a parent, when I drop my daughter off at school in the morning, as I did yesterday, today's a day off for kindergarten kids, I expect to pick her up in the afternoon, a happy little girl. And I don't think that's too much for any parent in this town to expect. You don't expect to drop them off into a culture or an environment that's going to see them bullied, harassed, intimidated, or worse, physically assaulted. I think it is about high time that this matter was dealt with much more seriousness and with the consequences that those who have to live this on a daily basis are experiencing, rather than the political hyperbole that is often debated in this place.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the noes have it. Division called for, ring the bells.